I have noticed oftentimes how people want to call it a cultural issue, a domestic issue, a religious problem. But that is not the case. That is definitely not the case. And when it comes to the violations of human rights, there has to be no excuse. And the true representatives of Afghan culture and religion are the women. And they are defining what freedom and liberty means to them within that. So we really have to center Afghan women and girls' voices.
I want to ask you about the film, the way the film starts, because I felt watching it, you're almost thrown into the film. It's quite confusing. There's kind of no explanation or run in to what's happening. Was that a deliberate choice?
Yes, I would like people to watch the film and be involved in the story from the beginning. So that's why I start the film kind of with a dream that it's exactly happened the engagement night. So, I mean, it was like everywhere in the world. It was very normal life. Of course, not really normal. So we were facing with a lot of bombing, suicide attacks from the Taliban in the last 20 years. So, but still we are trying to live in our country and build this country, men and women together, hand to hand. So that's why I want to start kind of involving beginning for this film as a even it's documentary, but it's still, we consider it as a movie.
Yeah, it feels like a movie. And, you know, the women in this film, they're not what people might expect Afghan women to be. I think we could probably say that. You know, they are very different. The three women who are featured are very different in themselves. Do you think that Western audiences watching this film will be surprised by that? Do you think they might not expect that women in Afghanistan before this point, were living in the way that they were?
I think we have seen a lot of documentary and news from Afghanistan past years, but I had this privilege to be one of them and live with them and be witness different part of my society and be able to talk from my society. So maybe we didn't have much of modern women in Afghanistan, like my generation, and there were so many educated women. They came back to Afghanistan and they want to build this country. So it was my intention to portray modern generation of this country, that they want to build this country, but somehow they cut off and they are not allowed to do it.
And obviously, I mean, that is the point of the film. The point is that women are unable to continue their education. They are stopped from participating in society. I think, Malala, for me, one of the things that comes out most strongly is that you go on this emotional roller coaster of defiance and frustration and anger, but then this loss of hope and this sense that, well, I can't change it. And a lot of that is because these women just don't feel people are listening to them.
I became part of this documentary for two reasons. One, because I have been an activist and an advocate for Afghan girls for a very long time. My foundation, Malala Fund, had been working there. And when the Taliban took control, everything changed. Those activists were receiving threats. The Taliban actually broke into their offices. They were threatening them that these people had worked for girls' education. And everything that women were so proud of, that they had worked so hard for, was suddenly a sign of threat. Women wanted to erase every part of their work life. And I've been doing this campaign for a very long time now. But when I came across this documentary, I realized that this could help us tell the stories from the women's point of view. That is what has been missing in all of the talks and the conversations that are happening. People make it so much about political conversation, and they're not talking about the Afghan women, the Afghan girls, the Afghan people. And women and girls are the ones who are facing the most difficulties and the most challenges. And then the second part for me is just the power of storytelling. And that's why I started this production company, Extracurricular, to partner with people like Sarah to produce projects like these so that we can give women and girls a chance to share their stories from their point of view.
Sarah, let's talk about the women, because they are all really strong characters, but they are all very different. Just explain to people who won't have been able to watch this film yet who they are and what they're like.
So I have been in contact with a dozen of women in Afghanistan after the collapse of Kabul. So we select some women who were willing to share their stories with us. So we train them how to shooting their daily life, but also we build a team on the ground to filming their life in the society. But also for these women were difficult to take someone inside the house and filming them. That's why we asked them to do it themselves. So these three women, right, one of them she's a young dentist, one of them is she's a young activist, and one of them were working for previous government in an office. So three of them, they lose all their right, and they have to stay at home, and they are not able to go out and continue their work. So, and we portray how from the first days of collapse of the country, they start losing all their basic right one by one to the now.
Yeah, and I think that's the most powerful part of the film, actually, is that progression from that anger and the protest to just feeling like you're almost, beaten down.
And to add that how they keep changing their strategy to fight back and searching for hope and resilience. So it's not only about these three, but they all belong to the community, and they are sitting together, talking about the situation and keep finding solution.
People might think, listening to this, that the film is very violent, or that there's a lot of aggression in the film. And there is a lot of aggression in it, but there isn't a lot of violence. There are some scenes that are very hard to watch. There's one scene in the back of a car, for example, where, a Taliban, well, what do you want to call it? A Taliban fighter, a policeman, whatever you want to say, says, "If you don't shut up, I'll kill you." And the woman in that scene is very defiant. She says, "Well, go on then, kill me. You won't kill me." How did you decide how much violence to keep in? Because I imagine there probably was quite a lot of that kind of footage.
I don't think so. The film is really violent to compare with what's happening exactly to the situation. Like, I can give that example of so many women, they were arrested by Taliban and they never come back.
Yeah.
So, and then I'm so sad to say that their family find their dead body in different part of the city. I didn't involve in these kind of things in the film at all.
Why did you choose not to?
Because I believe that when the story becomes so dark, it's so difficult for people to watch and be with this story. So I'm always trying to find a different or maybe artistic way to tell the violence. I give you an example. For example, in the film, you see that Taliban beating women in the street, that they do demonstration, and they shouting. The women are shouting and chanting. So, and then I decide to take the camera from the woman to the trees, and you hear that trees are shouting and shouting. So I find this kind of artistic way of telling that even the nature are screaming of this violence. So instead of showing what's happening in the ground. So I try to do it, but we cannot just escape the reality. It's what's happening. So there's no way to escape of telling all this violence is happening and continuing in this part of the world.
And the way that men are portrayed in this film is also, I think, quite interesting. You have a number of different male figures. You have, a father figure who is criticizing, essentially, his children, his female children, and then they mock him. You've got a father who seems to accept and want his daughter to be back out in society. And then you have a partner who is deeply emotionally distressed at what's happening to the person he loves. How did you put men into this?
In fact, women were left behind alone. So they didn't have much support in their fight and in their battle to take back their right. I was witnessing that women were beating in the street and men were watching. So in social media. And it's happened a lot. So of course there were a lot of men are supporting the education of their girls and their sisters. But I feel as a filmmaker that this male-dominated society thinking that education for women is their women problem, is not our problem. So, and I didn't get that. We didn't get that much of support from male in Afghan society during this difficult time, and still we didn't get that much support that we expected. So if we stay hand by hand beside of women, maybe the situation would be different. So of course there are a lot of elements that we reach in this situation, political, especially wrong political decision, but women didn't have much support from men in Afghan society. That's the reality.
I mean, Malala, women didn't have much support from anybody, really, Afghan women. I mean, the reality is that most people ignored and continue to ignore what was happening. Do you think Afghan women have been abandoned by the West, by big governments in the UK, the US?
I would look at what has been happening, and that tells us a lot about what is happening to Afghan women in the past three and a half years since the Taliban took over. Of course, Afghan women have been excluded from any negotiations and talks with the Taliban. And this is not a conversation from that long ago. Even in the recent talks that happened in the summer in Doha, the Taliban put a condition that they would not do the peace talks if women are included in the room. And countries accepted that. The UN accepted that. And for me, it's just this complete shock that if the Taliban do not even tolerate women in a room in Doha, how do we expect them to listen to any of these asks regarding the right to work, the right to education, the right to public appearance? I believe that the Taliban are putting women's rights at stake. They have issued more than 100 decrees and edicts, and majority of them are targeting women and girls. Afghanistan is the only country in the world where girls are banned from their secondary education and university level education. Women are prohibited from work and they're restricted from many other opportunities. When we look at the scale of the oppression that Afghan women are facing, there is no legal term. There is no international level recognized crime that can explain the intensity of it. And that's why a lot of the Afghan women activists and other human rights experts have been calling it a gender apartheid, because they believe that it is a systematic oppression that the Taliban are imposing upon women. Afghan women are living under a system of apartheid where every opportunity from them is taken away based on their gender.
And Sarah, just to explain to people who don't know much about this, who are listening to this, when we talk about taking away the rights of women, you've mentioned education, but it's not just education, is it? How are women living right now in Afghanistan?
So it's not about education, you're right. It's about having right to participate in the leadership decision, politics especially, and getting job and make a decision for their future. So I recently, things are getting more and more like we heard that women are not allowed to go to a restaurant alone, take a taxi alone. Nowadays, is you heard about that women are not allowed to sing for another woman behind the door. So for me, it's coming from these kind of roles coming from very dangerous madness mind. So that ordering, even women are not allowed to hear each other. So, and things is getting tough every day. So I think it's really dangerous. So they took all their basic rights, just basic rights from women in Afghanistan.
I mean, it's fear, really, isn't it? That's what's driving it. It's fear. It's fear of allowing women.
Huge fear that, Taliban are scared of all the beauties in this world. Like they don't like artists. They hate artists. Like being filmmaker and making film in Afghanistan is criminal now. All the cinema closed down.
Could you go back?
No, of course not. And if I go back, how can I make a film? I'm not allowed to go out with my camera. So it's not about living. It's about doing something. So musicians are not allowed to play music for especially women. So there's no artist, there's no cinema, there's no music, there is no theater, there's no education. And what they're doing is they're just radicalizing people. And it's huge fear, I think, for all of us to not take it as a normalizing, but thinking so for finding solution for this situation.
Is there a risk, Malala, that actually that fear and that control could drive a rise in terrorism, in sort of how, the growth of people who think that the Taliban are selling them an idea and that they would like to go and do something about it?
The Taliban ideology is not limited to Afghanistan. It has spilled into Pakistan as well. And we have seen that rise in other parts of the world as well. And for me, it could be any religion and any culture, but it's just the way it's been exploited and the way we have not put in the right systems in place to actually hold groups like these accountable. For me, it is the lack of accountability in the international law that allows it to happen. And what we are realizing is that even when foreign countries do step up or try to diplomatically handle these situations, women's rights and girls' rights are never a priority on the agenda. These are just, a few nice words sometimes that are uttered, but other than that, there's not a true commitment to it. And that's what has really shocked me in a way. I was also attacked by the same group. The Pakistani Taliban, they could not imagine a 15-year-old girl being in school and advocating for school. And we should actually look at what the Taliban have done. We should trust their acts. That they have showed us that they target women, they try to kill women, they try to beat women, harass women. And now through the fact that they have control over the country, they're exploiting all that's in their power to limit them legally, systematically from every opportunity. But on the other hand, if we look at the international system and accountability, we fall short. There's nothing in place. So I think that what the Taliban are doing at the international level, it has to be criminalized. It has to be in the Crime Against Humanity Treaty. And we have to push for the gender apartheid campaign so that we do not just protect women in Afghanistan, we protect the future generations and we protect women everywhere.
And yet America has just elected a man, Donald Trump, as president, who has been called a misogynist. He's somebody who has been accused of not respecting women. I mean, what does that say to you? How do you feel about that?
In the context of Afghanistan, I think it's too early to say much, but I would say that women everywhere are hoping for a better world. They need protection, they need safety, they need equal rights. And I would say that women's rights are at stake. And my priority is girls' right to education and women's right to work, which are at stake in Afghanistan. And if we cannot step up for the women in Afghanistan who are going through an extreme form of gender discrimination, we're giving little hope to women elsewhere as well.
Mm-hmm. And in my perspective, I deeply believe on democratic voting. And that's why I am here today to remind that women in Afghanistan, they don't have any democratic right or political right. So, and I believe when people voting, that they are raising their voice. And we want this for Afghan women especially, and Afghan people and all women around the world, that they have right to vote and all the political activities.
So Malala, I suppose the big question is, what's the solution here? You mentioned the UN, you mentioned the fact that, countries are happy to allow the Taliban to remove women from the room. Obviously that is, in your view, completely unacceptable. What's the message to America with a new government, to the UK with a new government, What are you asking those countries to do?
It's really important for countries like the US, UK, but countries all around the world. And I must point out that it's in fact countries elsewhere who are stepping up to support Afghan women, who are actually taking the lead on the gender apartheid campaign as well, including Mexico, Albania, Australia, and many others. And I had some meetings with the UK parliamentarians and cabinet members recently where they signaled support for Afghan women. I think countries need to ensure that they take their lead from Afghan women and girls. They need to make sure that that women whose rights are at stake are at the center of all of these conversations, that Afghan women are not excluded, that they put the right protection for them in the international law. And then I think finally it's all about their stories. And when I look at a documentary like Bread and Roses, I would want leaders to start with that. Like, watch the documentary, connect with the lives of Afghan women and girls and see what they're going through. These women had worked hard for their work, for their rights, for their political representations, and all of that has been suddenly snatched from them. We cannot just look away. We have to make sure that we share our solidarity with them. I appreciate everybody, every country who has stepped forward, and we need more countries to step forward and support them.
Sarah, I just want to end with you. Hearing that, knowing that people are going to watch this, what emotion are you left with at the end of it? Are you angry? Are you hopeful? Are you frustrated? How do you feel now?
Before I answer to your question, I have to say we all have a long way to justice and equality, and we have to keep fight for that. So I think it's the right time right now. All leaders think about the women in Afghanistan and make a decision about this situation. We cannot keep ignoring because it affects all of us life. So Taliban will not stay in Afghanistan forever with all the support they are receiving. And some media keep normalizing Taliban. And it's really dangerous for everyone's life in this world because part of our world is in the control of terrorists. So I think these women in the film, they risk their life and trust us. And these two wonderful women, Jennifer and Malala, they share their platform with women in Afghanistan. And they trust me as a filmmaker to raise their voice and asking the world to support these women. So I think when you watch a film about Afghanistan and when you read a book about Afghanistan and you write a tweet about Afghanistan, it means support. So, but as Malala mentioned, we can help women in Afghanistan in different way by pressure on leaders to make a quick decision about the situation. But watching this film and raising this voice and putting something in your social media about this film and women in Afghanistan would be really helpful.
Thank you, Bea. Yeah, go on.
I always think about the three women who put their lives at risk and dared to come forward and tell their story. They did it for the sake of the 20 million Afghan women. We need to share our solidarity with them. We need to support them. And I have noticed oftentimes how people want to call it a cultural issue, a domestic issue, a religious problem. But that is not the case. That is definitely not the case. And when it comes to the violations of human rights, there has to be no excuse. And the true representatives of Afghan culture and religion are the women. And they are defining what freedom and liberty means to them within that. So we really have to center Afghan women and girls' voices, and this documentary is an opportunity to do that.
And people can watch Bread and Roses. It will be out on the 22nd of November on Apple TV+. Sarah, Malala, thank you so much for joining us.